So it's backstory time with this week's episode of Dororo, episode 9. We finally get to see Dororo's backstory and also learn that 100% she is a girl, just walking in men's clothing, clearly so she doesn't get killed or gets treated differently than she would like, as in this time of war and just period of time overall. You can definitely tell that a girl in a time of war versus a man in a time of war, it's very two different outlooks. So every version of this story has had her as a girl, but up till now they haven't confirmed it, so I wasn't sure if they're going to gender bend it, make Dororo a man, or if they were just waiting to reveal it, and they waited to reveal it in this week's episode when it was her backstory. The whole idea of this episode is just, they've been walking around, maybe they haven't been eating too well. It seems that she got a fever, passed out for a few days, and over those few days we get to learn about her backstory. And this episode was pretty cool because once again, for the most part, this episode takes place in black and white. And I really enjoy it because most anime studios, when they do past sequences, they do grayscale. They make it black and white to showcase this is different from our current reality, but that's all they usually do with it. They make it black and white and they call it a day. There isn't too much thought here. The production team for this series is going absolutely in, and they're understanding that even though we are in the past, there needs to be extra layers to these past sequences. We're seeing it a lot with, blood is something that's continued to be detailed. We're seeing flames in this episode that are always detailed and bright and vibrant, full of color and just kind of impact. So when you look at them, you can tell that this isn't just an animator playing around with, the contrast, things like that. It clearly is supposed to look like the way that they do for a certain reason. It's to make it understand that this flame and kind of match the carnage that's kind of being seen around these characters. And then you have the flowers, which are consistently detailed and are full of life. We learn that there's like this legend that the reason that they have this kind of bright red color is that apparently in the times of war, they soak up all the blood on the battlefield, and that's how they get that color. At the end of the episode, we see her mother die on a bed of flowers. Like literally, there's a reason for certain things to be colored. The flames kind of match the blood and carnage of the battles. The flowers kind of build up to that end sequence there, and the blood is kind of self-explanatory. We want to see the blood. It makes it even more gruesome because everything else is so lacking in color. So when you see a big splatter of blood, you're kind of taken back being like, wow, that has to be horrible for a little kid to witness, even just adults who are fighting in this war. This episode was pretty good just because even though, I wasn't really sure what I wanted from this backstory, because on one hand, I knew that clearly the mother was taking care of her kid. We knew that she was a good mother doing her all, but I was never really thinking about the father for whatever reason. Maybe I just assumed that the father was just gone, but we get to see that essentially the parents were trying to rise up against our main character's father and his shitty leadership. And there's a noble goal there, but essentially if you're trying to fight against, the power in a war, bad things should be expected to happen. And bad things do happen, but they keep coming out on top. And one of his closest friends, the father's friend, says that maybe it's time that we go to the king. Maybe we have enough power at this point that we can get a better life and actually be on their side, and that kind of gets taken away, like, you can't be serious after everything they've taken from us. And morally, the parents are correct, fighting the system, trying to make a better life without kind of selling your soul. However, logically, this guy, as scummy as he is, he had the right idea. Like, in a time of war, especially with this time period, you just can't be a noble and righteous person and get out alive. We see what righteous gets people, and even though I agree with the path the parents took, you understand that their ultimate outcome, it makes sense. And yes, the dude did sell out, his friends and whatever, but we get to see the difference, right? You could have maybe even changed the system from the inside, or maybe you could have just let your kid have a full tummy, right? There was so many ways that they could go about this, but I don't disagree with any character's action. I understood, why you would sell out your band of misfits so you will always have a full stomach, so you will be able to survive the next tomorrow, and that the majority of this gang are going to live because he's taking them with him. But I also understand why you have this noble, righteous mindset of, after everything we've lost, we can never shake hands with basically the leader that screwed us over. I completely get that, and that's why I like this backstory, is it's a little morally ambiguous, right? You kind of look at it and you say, yeah, this is the morally correct outcome, but this is the logical outcome, and none of these characters are technically right. I mean, if you do look at it, we have characters who are just killing others who are just fighting in a war, probably for the same reasons that most people are. They just want to feed their family. they don't know who's the morally right person or leader, but they were born in this kingdom, so they're gonna fight. And then we have Dororo's parents killing them just because they're fighting for a king that they don't like, but they probably don't even know most of what this king's done. So no one's really in the correct here, and that's what I really like about the backstory. It's very conflicting with how I felt, so watching it play out, watching this man have one of the most badass deaths I've ever seen. He gets stabbed with a spear and says, "Let me show you how to use this," impales him with him, and then dies. Like, even though it's sad to see that, you know, a little girl sees her father die like that, that has to be the most badass death out there. Like, seriously, in terms of this war, I doubt anyone's died in a more gruesome and badass way than this man did. And just kind of watching the progression, like, at first when you see the mother kind of get approached, there's kind of like this dude sitting by a tree. I was like, oh, is this going to be like a prostitution scene so she has money to feed her kid? But then it transitions into this whole, like, they're giving away free food, we get to see the shitty friend, and it was a really interesting moment because we get to see how goddamn determined this mother is to keep her kid alive. She literally puts her hands out and gets burned by boiling hot soup so her kid could eat. And when asked, like, are you alright? She's like, it's absolutely fine, take your time. And you can see how burned her hands are. This is one of the few cases where you get to see color again. You get to see the burn marks. Mother of the Year, holy hell, absolutely incredible. And just all the little build-up moments to this episode, you're seeing that Dororo wants to be able to fight in battle, and it kind of makes that end reveal that Dororo is 100% a girl a bit more, because the mother's saying, like, maybe when you're older, but really, she doesn't want her kid to be fighting in a battle. You get to see a lot of action without actually seeing a lot of action in this episode. It was really interesting. Like, there's a lot of battles that we get told of, or we kind of see small sequences of, but we don't get to see too much movements in the battle, and typically I'd say that's a bad thing, but I think with what they're trying to tell with this backstory, having the focus be on the character moments more than the actual movements in battle, seeing a couple of arrows fly or seeing a couple of slashes to the throat, it was more than enough to get it across, and I liked how they detailed the kind of snippets and kind of still frames moving around, a lot of blood, a lot of carnage, and you got to understand how many battles this band of misfits absolutely has been through. It was pretty crazy when you first see the betrayal and you see so many arrows go inside this guy's leg. It was beautiful and gruesome all at the same time. I also quite liked the voice acting of the parents. I thought there was a lot of emotion, and you could really tell that there was a reason why they weren't going to jump ship to the enemy side. You could tell that in the pain in their voice, so much has been taken from them, and they just couldn't forgive this guy. It was absolutely unforgivable, but you also understood why this kind of guy was like, we gotta do this. I mean, do you want to kind of risk it all, or do we want to use this power and kind of rise to the top and actually have wealth and survive this war? You kind of understand all perspectives there, and I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of get across this backstory, and I like how backstory wasn't being kind of explored as character development. A lot of times series, they use backstories as a way to flesh out their characters. You know, if you have a 2-core series, episode 18 comes around, you get to learn a backstory about your character, and you're like, oh, they developed, we got to see all this information. But then you look at episodes 1 through 17, they actually didn't change at all. So they try to excuse backstory as character development. Here, because we're only 9 weeks in, we've already seen the backstory for our main character here. We already get to see what happened and what led this kid on the path that they're currently traveling. So now, going forward in the 2nd core and the remainder of the 1st core, we have so much room to learn and grow from this point on, and they can't use backstory as a way to excuse character development like so many anime out there. I'm really thankful for this, because I thought when we got backstory, it'd probably be like episode 13 through 16, somewhere around there, and we wouldn't see too much growth up till then. But we actually got to see character development prior to this backstory. We got to see last week with how the whole kind of fight sequence was going down and Dororo actually putting herself out there in the battle, and now we got to see the backstory and fleshing out of what happened in her past and why she currently is the way that she is. This series is incredible. They understand visual production can be more than just flash and kind of being like, oh, that looks pretty. They can actually use that beautiful imagery to tell a story alongside the character dialogue like we got in this week's episode. They understand that you can develop characters and flesh them out in very subtle but noticeable ways. I love how our main character is still pretty much silent. We see that he's picking up words here or there. We know that he can say Dororo, he can say body and hot or burn, very simple words. But I like how we don't have to see him sitting around a campfire, words taught to him. We understand that when we come back each week, we haven't seen every single day of these two. We understand that small things can happen. They might resupply their food and medicine. They might learn a word or two, so when we kick into the next week, he already knows maybe the word sun or tomorrow, something like that. we don't have to see every little detail. So when we kick in and we see that he learns an extra word or two, we're like, oh, that's really cool. So now he's learning more and more, he's getting more fleshed out. But they're not just immediately going from silent protagonist to a talkative badass. He's very subtly being built up to someone who can communicate, and I actually think that makes this such an interesting anime because we're not just watching the same dynamic time and time again. A badass wanderer who can talk all the time, who has his kid companion, who shouldn't be there but is. What we actually have is a pretty penalized silent wanderer who's slowly becoming more human, a kid who shouldn't be there, but we're glad is because the kid kind of acts as the voice in this entire system right now. It kind of makes everything feel new and interesting. The premise is already interesting, but the way that they're exploring this kind of samurai time period of war, it really builds it into such a unique atmosphere. Visually, it looked great, the sound was on point, sound effects weren't as crazy as past episodes, but the music was really great, the voice acting killed it, it was emotional, it was gripping, it had a little bit of everything. I'd say this is probably top 3, top 4 episodes of this series for me up till now. I still think Mioe's death is going to be my favorite episode for times to come, but this was a really good episode alongside last week. I'm having a really fun time with this series. It's absolutely incredible. Really don't have a major complaint with this episode past. Maybe it would have been nice to see a bit more in terms of the action, like a bit more movement to the action, but like I said, it wasn't too bad. It actually got across the story that it was trying to tell exceptionally well, and the idea of the flowers and the bed of flowers at the end of the episode, tragic and beautiful, and there was even a little bit of comedy with Dororo being like, hey, did she take off my clothing? You better not have seen I'm still a boy. That was a pretty amusing sequence overall. But let me know what everyone thought of this week's backstory focused episode down in the comment section below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Your favorite moment? Whatever you're feeling, let me know, and be sure to like the video if you did enjoy, and also hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. But until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.